everybody, this is Dr. Shannon Crawford with 7M Culture, and I am delighted to have our guest tonight, Jenny Ackles. She is on the Education Mountain. And for the 7M Culture, one of our major focuses is the importance of what education system the next generation is being influenced by. What are the teachers teaching? What is being allowed in the school curriculum? What are the norms in sexual education? What is the history of America they're being taught? What philosophical orientations are the underpinning of what our students are being educated with? So I would love and be honored to have Jenny Ackles, who is in a public school teaching what grades?
Kindergarten through 4th right now. I'm a special ed teacher at an elementary level.
Yes. So we were just visiting, because we're friends in real life, before the video started, to just kind of catch up and talk about passions, and also to pray over this time, because we know this is a mountain that significantly impacts the way that people are shaped to think. And so I was just hearing one of her stories that I thought would be really important, of hearing about the No Good Club that you were sharing.
Oh, I'd love to share that. I was talking with Shannon earlier and just talking about how I had an opportunity to go to South Africa many years ago on a missions trip, and we were involved with a leader of a church there who was a former gang member, who I found out was the leader of the largest cartel in all of South Africa, written up in my travel book. And I happened to, while I was there, have dinner with him. He had since gotten saved and had been born again, given his life to Jesus, and was having a church ministry outside of what used to be his drug headquarters. So we had dinner one evening, sat next to him, and he asked me what I did. And I happened to mention that I was a special ed teacher. And he said, well, that's so interesting, because when I was in school, I had an experience with a teacher where I had learning difficulties, and she ostracized me in my classroom, that I started a club called the No Goods. Club grew into a gang, and that gang grew into the largest cartel that's in South Africa. And it was just a testimony of the power that teachers have with our words, and what we speak over our kids, and how we view our kids, and what lens we're looking at them through each day, and just the power of our words, and being able to either call out the gold and the redemptive gifts in our students, and seeing them through God's heart and his eyes. And so that really marked me. It gave me fresh vision for what I do. And just being in the special ed world, that's been my world for many years now. Just the drive behind that, and knowing that in our prison systems, about 70% of our inmates have learning disabilities. So it's a big field, and there's a big need there. And unfortunately, it's led to for some not a good path. So that was an interesting testimony.
Yeah. And the fact that juxtaposition, that a lot of the innovators and the world leaders who have changed society have also been either dyslexic or some other learning disability. So to know the extremity of how you can go from, like, possibly in prison, or a billionaire who is coming up with an iPhone. Like, there's just such a breadth of dimension of where people can end up with the exact same foundation. And exactly. I think as a culture, we've really focused on the fruit issues and trying to resolve things later, like in the penal situation, that versus what is the root issue, and making sure that we're really looking after those students that might be a little bit more vulnerable, and preventatively caring for their souls, versus just kind of pushing people through a system because we have to test certain scores or keep a certain funding. And I know there's a lot of politics to that, and I don't want to undermine the value of that, but how sad that there are a lot of students that can kind of get pushed through the system and may not actually know how to read or how to have life skills, because that school is overloaded, or they need to have good pass rates or whatever, athletes that they don't want to fail, they need them to play in that next quarter. So what are your thoughts about how people could kind of follow through the cracks if we're not looking out for them?
I think that's a very, very real reality. And part of it is just making sure that teachers are really well trained and
Mhm.
looking at, again, it's the hands-on piece of education. It's our what does your special ed department look like? Is it well funded? Do you have enough
Mhm.
thing? Are your teachers differentiating within their classroom? So are they meeting just the average student, or are they able to differentiate for all of their needs, whether it be on the gifted side of things or on the
Mhm.
disabled side of the spectrum? And so part of that is just a training piece. And one thing that I've loved about the fruit of this COVID time in education, I know it's been a challenge for families that are working and have kids at home and learning online, but it's opened back up this partnership, this beautiful partnership again between school and home, where I think we've kind of gotten away from that partnership in a sense where parents haven't quite known exactly what's been going on in the classroom. And now the Zoom world has opened them up to exactly what the teacher's teaching that day. And I have parents that are sitting in on some of the lessons that I'm doing with my students. And so they're really seeing the curriculum. They're really seeing what it looks like for their child to be engaged in their learning. And I think now that that's opened up, it gives parents a better place to stand when they go to advocate for their kids at school. So that partnership with parent advocation, and then
Mhm.
sure that schools are equipped and teachers are really well trained to be able to spot those students that do have signs of learning disabilities, and there's tons of resources now available for them.
Yeah.
So being able to test early enough and
Yeah.
get kids what they need.
And if you are somebody listening and you're a parent, what would you say to them if they are starting to recognize something in their child?
Oh, I think definitely set up a parent conference, parent teacher conference with your child's teacher, and then just talk through, be real honest with the things that you're seeing at home and their perspective, and just know that you are the parent, you as the parent know your child the best. And so sometimes that takes just continuing to push that button of advocacy of, if a teacher is a little more timid, to really recognize what's going on, just to keep bringing that to the table. And
Mhm.
at any time, a parent has within their rights to call what we call an ARD meeting, where they can ask um, for testing, for special ed testing, and the public school is required to provide that. So
And pay for it.
always to, yeah, and pay for it.
Mhm.
There's always outside testing, but if you are noticing some significant learning differences, then I would definitely first conference with your teacher, see what they're seeing,
Mhm.
opportunities for your child to be put on a 504 plan where they can get additional accommodations, depending on where they qualify, what learning needs we see that have developed, and then also for you to get further testing through the school district.
Mhm. I love the advocacy of parents looking out for what their kids are learning. I think for a long time, there's been, obviously depending on family and region, but there's been a real emphasis on the college transcripts far away and not necessarily the immediacy of how the child's soul is right now. And so, what I've been seeing a lot as a psychologist is just seeing how many students are actually dealing with anxiety and depression,
Yeah.
and how ADHD can actually look very similar in presentation to anxiety, depression, and trauma. So when there's too much pressure and stress for that college application, or family stress, or preoccupied, or COVID, or kids are really pretty perceptive, and so they can take in the environment of what their parents are feeling, and what stressors are going on in school and the pressure that they're feeling. And before they know it, they can start developing symptoms that may look like ADHD, but actually may be more anxiety driven. They may be more depression. So a lot of that performance and comparison that students are under, research says boredom is actually one of the biggest predictors of innovation. So if kids are not allowed to just be dumb kids playing outside and building a fort and doing things constructively and allowed to just have that free space for their mind to wonder and create, but they're constantly being driven. And then many of my clients, they're in adolescent years, staying up until 10 p.m. On a Zoom call with a tutor, and then waking up at 6 a.m. for the next day, and then Groundhog's Day. And I couldn't imagine that. I went to prep school and I thought it was stressful, but I can't imagine the schedule a lot of these students are walking out, and it's just so normalized that it's expected. But I am wondering whether learning differences are not being identified because kids are just learning how to internalize all that anxiety and the learning difference and just trying to like suppress it, or if they do have emotions going on. So hopefully parents are slowing down and maybe recognizing whether cognitively or emotionally the wellness of their soul of the child, not just their performance on their grade letter.
That's so, so important. And, you know, we live in a real fast-paced world right now, and most families have two working parents in their household. And so the school is kind of become a surrogate parent in much of the way. And so they are seeing, you know, some of my kids spend more time of their awake time with me or at school than they do with their parents during the week, because they're
Yeah.
off at 7:30, and then they are a part of the after school program and they get picked up at 6, just enough time to have dinner and a bath, and then they're off to bed. And so we really get the full picture of their day and what's
Mhm.
happening. And so I think teachers and counselors and staff at school can definitely be good eyes, but at the end of the day, you know, the parent's going to be the most vested, hopefully, in their child's education. And so being their advocate and really asking the hard questions and pushing for testing if that's what's needed, or just making sure that your voice is being heard, I think
Mhm.
it's really effective um, in schools for us to put a plan together to best serve those kids. So
Yeah.
um, I think I'm loving that we're opening this partnership back up again with COVID. I mean, if there's any good fruit, there's been a lot of good fruit that's come out of COVID, but for our schools, I think it's just kind of opened the door again, where parents are really getting the full picture of what their child's school day looks like, what they're being taught in the curriculum,
Mhm.
lesson looks like, how their kids are doing, how engaged are they, you know, where are they struggling? They're seeing that within the lesson. And so when we come to a parent conference and say, yeah, Sally is struggling in this area, they're able
Mhm.
to say, yeah, I saw that. I saw that on Zoom with you, Miss
Yeah.
Ackles. You know, they're part of that team now in a
Mhm.
sense. So so grateful for that.
Yes. And so, what would you recommend for teachers or teacher aides? What are they to look for, do you think, now, especially that there's a lot of transition, things aren't looking the same, kids are in periods of adjustment? What should they be looking for in order to best serve the kiddos, do you think?
You know, I think definitely that social emotional piece is key. And you can pick that up in kids if you are a quiet observer. So I would say definitely keep your eyes open for students that fly under the radar. What I like to say is there's something about them not being confident enough to be able to
Mhm.
regularly in class. Part of that could be personality, but building enough relationship with that student to understand if that is a personality piece, or if it's just they don't know and they're too afraid to show that they don't know, and
Mhm.
a little bit further. So um, and then anxiety plays into that too. I have, you know, several students that present a lot of anxious behaviors that also are on the spectrum, and they
Mhm.
is labeled as students that are students with autism or on the autism spectrum, but they would have a need to leave the classroom, take extra trips to the bathroom, or just need an extra walk or get an extra drink of water. Or if you're seeing a lot of acting out behaviors, there's is a
Mhm.
cause to behavior. So digging a little bit deeper and finding out what the trigger is, what the antecedent is for that behavior for those kiddos is a good
Yeah.
place to start.
Yeah. And I know that people who go into the helping professions like teaching, they have such beautiful hearts, but we also know that we're also human. And so even as a psychologist, I have to be aware of my blind spots of how a client might be hitting some of my own raw nerves. So I've heard of a lot of students, and I'll just share my own story of when I was younger, I was really smart in certain areas, but then really not smart in other areas. And so my teacher, when I was really young, she would name call. And because she thought that was motivating, but really, I think she was overwhelmed because she had a very large class. And so, because she saw me perform well in certain areas, and I hadn't been tested for a learning disability, that she just thought it was underperformance and laziness. And then I would talk in class, and so I would get yelled at and pointed out. And so I started to hate school. And in reality, I had poor vision and it just hadn't been tested yet. So there were
Oh,
certain things that, in her own life, who knows what she was going through. She was probably overwhelmed and anxious, and she just needed things to go smoothly one day and not have another kid talking or whatever. So my heart goes out to her because I know she was a good teacher, but just the importance of those words, and especially when you're that young. I think I was like third, fourth grade, and I didn't know I had a learning disability and some learning differences. So how much that impacted my self-esteem and confidence. And for a lot of students that I work with, we go back to memories and it will root back into a teacher or a principal or some authority figure saying something, and just like the deflating woundedness that can create, or learned helplessness that can create as a false label, a false identity, that we almost put a glass ceiling over somebody. And it took a lot of years for those wounds to start peeling away, to stop walking in my true identity. So for you as a teacher, how do you do self-care to make sure that you're not accidentally kind of bleeding some of your own frustration, or just these kind of words accidentally slipping through our mouth, or facial expressions? Kids can be really vulnerable to our facial expressions just as much as the actual words that come out.
right. I think a lot of that is needing to abide in Jesus,
Mhm.
the Lord, and walking in his peace. And there are many, 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 many imperfect days. There's a lot that's put on a teacher. Just there's a lot of pressure,
Yes,
there's a lot of
it's
um,
a hard job.
data, and you're given a certain amount of time where you're expected to get a lesson in, and you're charting progress week to week and month to month, and there's tons of administrative details, and so
Yeah.
have all of those things bearing down, and then you've got a little person in front of you. And so I think it's been so crucial for me to have a healthy team around me of
Mhm.
people that I can go to, and just if I need to just blow some steam off,
Mhm. Yeah.
that it's not going to affect
Yeah.
in a constructive way, just to be able to encourage one another and get back up and do it again. Or I in special ed, you deal a lot with kids that have emotional disturbances, and their behaviors can be a trigger, and you have to really discipline yourself to not be affected by whether it's aggressive behavior or oppositional defiant behavior,
Mhm.
and name calling or cursing, or you just have to learn how to turn that off. And
Yeah.
so finding other outlets outside of school, whether it's exercising or just spending time with the Lord and worship,
Mhm.
and praying over my classroom, trying to keep in an environment of peace. I think that's what
Mhm.
I've asked the Lord to do in my room, is just that it would be a place of nurture and
Mhm.
be a safe place for my kids, where they felt safe and they felt known, and they'd feel the peace and the presence of the Lord there. And so, um, yeah, I think just bathing that in intercession, and
Mhm.
realistic with myself, and knowing what my weak areas are and how I'm compensating for those, because
Yeah.
there are days, and there are days where I've had to ask my kids forgiveness. So
Mhm.
done that as a teacher to my students, and said, I was very impatient with you today, and I apologize. Will you forgive me? And so that's been so powerful in
Yes.
building that rapport and connection with my kids, and just teaching them that in the midst of, they're so used to feeling like they're the only one that makes a mistake, They feel like they've made mistake after mistake after mistake by the time I get them because they've struggled in school for so long.
Mhm.
And to see an adult make a mistake is like, you know, and,
And take ownership.
and take ownership.
Yeah.
Powerful for them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. So there's different ways that we could take this conversation because there's the part of me that cares about the political part, the family part, the teacher part, the school administration side. And so I think because there is just such a tenderness in you, I'd love for us to just take a couple of minutes of when you're with a student, what is kind of going on inside of you? Because I know there's the transfer of information. That's a big part of teaching, obviously. But
Yeah.
what we know with attachment theory is that being seen and being known, being recognized as a whole person, and even being apologized to, that there's this sense of I'm a separate person, worthy and having dignity for my wounds to be acknowledged in this relationship, versus it just is, and you stuff it under a rug, and it all gets compartmentalized or whatever. So I love just hearing like the tenderness in your voice. I love watching your facial expressions, and I can only imagine what it's like for a kiddo that if, I don't know the hours, but probably an insane amount of their life is with this teacher, and how precious it is that you're able to look at them with such worth and value and dignity, even if they're being a little pill that day. What is kind of going on inside of you when maybe you're dealing with a difficult student, but you're still trying to convey that honor and that love and dignity to a student?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I think I try to keep in mind the simplicity of gold, digging for gold in people.
Mhm.
And so that I have to keep at the forefront of my mind with my kids, especially when they're in an exacerbated state sometimes, they're
Trigger.
in meltdown mode.
Yeah.
And just knowing your kids, you understand that, okay, my little guy here, he was taken out of his parents' home. He lives with uncle. His uncle is an alcoholic.
Mhm.
Best he can. He is doing the best he can just to be at school every day, and
Yeah.
school has become his safe spot. This is
Yeah.
a safe place. And so I think just keeping those things at the forefront, and then also just taking care of my own soul. If I have enough sleep and I haven't stayed up at work too late the day before, and I have my own outlets. I think when your soul is taken care of and tended to, it's much easier to respond in those crisis situations with God's peace and love. But yeah, I don't think you can go into special education without having that sense of value for each person. And, I've worked with kids that have cerebral palsy. I've worked with
Mhm.
nonverbal in wheelchairs. I've worked with kids, on the spectrum that are really gifted, that have autism, but are really gifted in a certain area, and everything in between, the general education kiddos as well. And so you learn God has such value for each person, and they each bring a special gift. I can look back on my classes where I was teaching life skills and just thinking about, even though this little guy was nonverbal, he just had the biggest smile and he received my hugs. And so that made me feel loved every day. It's, you want to give a hug and you want somebody to receive it. It made me feel loved every day. And so
Yes.
and his hugs, and to see the effort that he put forth
Mhm.
to do things that we take you know for granted so easily. And yeah, anyway, it's just having that value for the person.
Yeah.
They're a person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that the more that we see someone through that beauty, that gold, that even for me as a psychologist inside, I am trying to say, whether the whole spectrum of whatever client I'm seeing, I'm trying to say in my heart, you have worth and value. so that that's what's coming across in my facial expression, the tone of voice. And sometimes you have to choose that, right? Like you have to see value and worth, even when that person may not be living up to it. But that's because we live in a kingdom where your worth doesn't come from your performance. It comes because it's
Yes.
inherent. It is who you are. And then you draw people up to that identity versus speaking to who they're acting like, and then they live down to that identity. And I think that's so
Yes.
important that we're aware of, that we're the change agent just by the way you treat someone, the honor, the dignity, the love, the respect, when you call them young ladies and young gentlemen, and this conveying of worth and value, that they can live up to that and their posture will change. And you can see shame just kind of melt off of people and they'll perform better. And
That is so true. That is so true. I have a little guy that I work with. He's in second grade and he's dyslexic and he is still learning, at the beginning of this school year, he was still learning his alphabet letters and sounds, which he was feeling so overwhelmed when I told him, you're gonna learn how to read this year. And he was like, I can't read. I don't know all my letter sounds. Here he is in second grade feeling overwhelmed in the
yeah,
classroom. And so little by little by little, it's just been so sweet to see his confidence build, and just we've set a goal and
mhm,
he's getting closer to that goal. And so he can come, he's so proud. He's become one of my hardest working students. He'll go home, he'll practice his words at night, and we weren't getting anything out of him in the springtime when we were online, and now he just feels that confidence. And it's exactly what you said. You call them higher, you call
yeah,
them higher standard, and they really rise up to that.
yeah,
They just need somebody that's going to believe in them. And
yes,
it sounds so almost cliche, I know, in the education world, but it really isn't. It's really a simple truth. And it's so foundational in kids learning. So there you have the academic side of it, but there are these simple truths that can come off to seem so cliche and like
mhm,
times, but they're really foundational for that academic piece to come into
yeah,
place. So
yeah.
I that you brought that up.
Uh-huh, absolutely. And I want to make sure that, especially in this episode, that we are honoring you teachers. So hopefully we have some teachers out there that are listening, and that that we respect you and we value you. And I value the teachers who sat with me when I was like not getting multiplication table. And they would just like try to give me different methods and different tactics and different strategies. And so I know for myself that I owe teachers a huge debt of having to stick with me when I was probably one of those really difficult students. And the people that did speak life and speak identity and helped me live up to a higher standard, that I don't think I would be a doctor if I didn't have people who gave me that message, even though I maybe wasn't achieving at that level. And I have no idea if it was true or not, but somebody along the way told me that people who got easy A's in school were less successful later in life. And people who had to work for that C and had to do all the tutoring, that those were the really successful people in life. And because somebody told me that, I was proud of my C's. And I went to my tutoring and I did all of that, because I had somebody who told me that. And so I just want to speak life and value into every teacher, every principal, administrator that's out there, that this has been a lot in 2020 of adjustments and pivots and scheduling online, in person, and back and forth. And parents have gotten very entitled to be rude. I've worked with a lot of school administrators and school counselors that are just getting cussed at. So as a culture, we need to stop that. We're all on the same side, and we need to advocate for each other and not against each other. Um, and so I just really want to make sure that tonight we're honoring all of those who are in the education system, that we know that this is a hard job, and we bless you. Thank you for being in the fight. Thank you for not giving up on these kids, because I think, Jenny made it very clear that there's sometimes you may be the largest imprint in that child's life for most of their waking hours, between going to sports and extracurricular or video games or sleep or whatever else they're doing. You may be that longest impact in that child's day. And just being mindful of those nuggets, those identity statements, that you can just feel something that it may not be in their natural evident on that kid, but you can speak that and you'll see them start to blossom like a little flower that you start watering. And you can do the positive against all the negative that's been said over them. That one Rhema word, that one word of life and truth resonates and it can unlock things in kids. So Jenny, is there anything else you would add, knowing that you are an actual educator in the fight, showing up every day with all this craziness going on and still loving kids? What would you say to your other teachers out there?
I would just say grace. There's so much grace. And yeah, I can't tell you how many incredible teachers that I've come across
Mhm.
in my little career of teachers that are so dedicated. I mean, they are shopping for kids, they're buying supplies for kids, they're working really
Mhm.
long weekends on the, or really long hours on the weekend. And they don't go to bed and leave their work ever at home or at school. They're constantly thinking about kids and how they can do better. And they're just so vested. And so, I think I would just say, give yourself grace. You're doing an amazing job, and there's a lot of pressure, and there's so many hours in the day. So you need to take time to take care of yourself as well. And I'm preaching to the choir as well.
Mhm. To yourself. So,
Yes.
yeah, I agree. And then we
As
also
you can
wanted
hear
to,
my teacher brain, my lack of sleep is coming.
yes, I know. And it's nighttime, which is ironic. It's not escaping me that we probably need to cut this short in order for us to protect you because you're teaching
Oh,
tomorrow.
sweet.
But I did like the point that we talked about, that maybe not everybody is called to be a teacher. And maybe not everybody is called to the big federal government out there, but what are low stakes things that people can do to get involved? Because there are issues in our school system and our education of what's being allowed in curriculum and what children are being exposed to. What are some things that families can get involved in that are more accessible and local?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say if you can get involved in any way, just run for school board, your local school board, and be a voice on the local school board, because really those are the decision makers for your district. So when we are looking at what kind of curriculum your child is going to be exposed to, simple things is whether, a transgender student is allowed into a female or a male locker room with full exposure. Those decisions come to a school board level. And so parents, you're vested, you're taxpayers, you're paying for your child's education,
Yeah.
and your school board members should have your ear.
Mhm.
If you feel like they don't, then I would really, really encourage you to run for school board, be on your local PTA board, or become a city council member. I'll give you one example. In Dallas 2 summers ago, we had a drag queen story hour that came to our public library. And even despite many local people calling in and protesting that, they had an outdoor protest of that. And it was still allowed in the public library. And they read a very inappropriate book. They were dressed inappropriately. And so I just wrote a letter to my local officials. So the local city council member and my um, local governing um, people that could, do something about it. I have not heard anything back yet, but it's one little voice, that says
Yes.
this is not okay.
Yes.
And I'm a tax-paying citizen, and I'm also an educator, and I'm an advocate
Mhm.
for children and their innocence. And
Mhm.
so this is not okay. And I'm
Right.
making my voice be known. So we really, teachers, you can have really well-meaning teachers in a school system, and in the classroom, we can be a voice of influence. But when it comes to the curriculum and what we're asked to um, kind of teach down the pike, at some point our hands are tied,
Yeah.
and we're still required to teach the curriculum that's given to us. And so it's really, really important that I know that there's a massive shift right now where parents are seeing what's happening in our public school systems, whether it be around the transgender issue or sex education issue. And they're saying, I don't want to have any part of that for my child. And I'm pulling my child out of the public school system. I'll homeschool or I'll look into private education. And I am totally championing that. I think you should be a steward of your child's education, but at the same time, I'm afraid that what's going to happen is that the voice of
Yeah.
values and Judeo-Christian ethics and is being stripped away from our public school system. And so we have left all of these other kids, whose parents aren't involved or are just, not in the fight, and they're left to be on the receiving end of everything coming down the pike. And so
Mhm.
I think it's a real great opportunity to be salt and light in culture, because we're really formulating this next generation
Yeah.
in our schools. And it's an easy way to have a huge impact on
Mhm.
kids and the next generation and what they're being taught,
Yeah.
is just to be a part of your local school board,
Yes. Yeah.
the
And
PTA,
again, like we
volunteer.
were talking about before we started the video, I didn't grow up with that. I just thought you're supposed to vote for your president. You're supposed to care about these few issues that are really important to a Christian. But nobody was ever telling me the importance of how the largeness of what a school board, like local school board, can decide. Even choosing the textbooks of it, whether it's anti-American or if it's pro-socialism or capitalism, like there's so many philosophies of education that are being spread, and somebody on a school board's making that decision. Like it just never, nobody taught me that. And so now I feel like really awakened, like we need to put people on school boards. We need people in mayors and city councils and governors. We need like local government to be bolstered and not just championing alone. Yes, championing the far away and the judicial and the federal and the Senate and all of that. But good golly, how important it is to be involved in our local government and making sure that we have a seat at the table to influence a whole generation of kids who are growing up with things as if they're fact, or being exposed to things that we were talking about. Children are in a latency period, that they actually develop their self-esteem, their identity, their confidence during this period where sexuality is actually supposed to be dormant. And so sexuality kind of awakens when they're little bitty, not like actually engaging in sexuality, just like they play with their like little penis or whatever. Like it's just kind of discovery of their body, but it's not supposed to be an actual like engaging in anything. And then they go into latency where they're supposed to go into inferiority. They're not supposed to go into inferiority, but they're supposed to go into industry, and they're supposed to go into these stages of confidence and competence and autonomy, and I can race and I can run faster than you, and boys and girls can have non-sexual relationships. That is a stage of development that's getting completely bypassed if everything gets sexualized way too young, because you better believe if you put something in your education system like sex education at a really young informative age, kids are now going to explore on each other. I mean, they're doing it with the social media and the celebrities as well, but we don't need to add to the problem with our actual education reinforcing this playing and acting out behavior that then it's like dopamine, right? Like it's cocaine, I said that really funny, that they would rather have the donut, metaphorically, the sex play, than the actual like reading my textbook and being good at debates and learning how to like race at this thing that I'm passionate about. Everything defaults to this addicted brain. And I think introducing sexuality at such a young and pivotal stage does a lot more to hinder identity, self-esteem, confidence, and set people up for addiction issues, because the brain defaults to just wanting the euphoria, the high, versus the boredom of reading a textbook, acquiring knowledge slowly, building schema, which are neural networks that then you can draw on the rest of your life, and you can be in college and still remembering those facts and that knowledge. And even for me, having sexuality introduced young because I was molested at a formative age during latency, that messed with my confidence, self-esteem, ability to learn. So many things were negatively impacted that it took me years to undo and to help rewire my brain in the proper function, because I didn't have that latency period. And so I think that's one of the critical things we need to be putting before a school board, before governors, before people that are making decisions of what's allowed in school curriculum is the importance of the psychological makeup of a child needing to go through certain developmental stages in an appropriate order, and not putting way too many developmental constructs on them when they're really, really young and they don't have a grid for all of that. And so then they're just naturally going to go with the one that's the easiest to go play and reenact and watch porn and play on their siblings and their neighbors. And molestation doesn't have to just be adult to a child. It could also be children acting on each other. And it does the same psychological effect of shame, of now feeling dirty, used, something's wrong with me. There's this internal knowing. And I've heard some people try to argue that if we just normalize it, that sex for children is normal, and that if it's not bad, then they won't have shame feelings. That's not true. I have worked in this field way too long. And even for children who've never been told that sexuality in childhood is not good or whatever, they still fundamentally inherent in the human psyche, there's just a knowing that you're not supposed to engage in sexual things. There's this knowing that you're supposed to do it secretly and hide. And there's something like, I'm not supposed to tell people. And that's not just a social construct of shame and puritanical or whatever, but there's this sense that like we really need to encourage children to protect their innocence, protect their abstinence, and not just give them more tools to engage in sex with contraception, but to tell them like the worth and value of waiting and developing all these milestones, not awakening love until it so desires, so that then they have the maturity to steward that and they're ready for that developmental milestone. And then they're a whole, complete person versus this very addicted, kind of lopsided, don't really know who I am, and I'm willing to stay in toxic relationships and degrading selfies and videos that students are passing around to each other because they don't know who they are. And so that's becoming normalized. And I'm like, what is going on with our school system?
Exactly. No, well, I would just say, I think it's this tension because the school system is seeing the reality of that culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
So from that perspective, that's why they're saying, no, we really need to be teaching literally. I mean, it's on the books of teaching how different kinds of contraception in seventh grade. So you're talking about 12-year-olds that are learning about how to use contraception, what different kinds of contraception there are in seventh grade, and that people are seeing a need for that because there are seventh graders and sixth graders and fifth graders that are now sexually active. And so it's this tension of what really is appropriate, what is the job of the school system,
Mm-hmm.
what is, gosh, we're in a crisis now because we have our children that are sexually engaged and we don't know how to make sure that, since that's the choice they're making, give them a safer option, which I don't think that's necessarily the answer to that at all. And then, then parents are still left out of the loop because they can opt out, but it should be an opt-in. It should be, we're not teaching this unless you're giving us permission to opt in. And now we will present to the parents that have opted in this part of our health curriculum that involves sexual education. But otherwise, it's a blanket sex ed for now beginning at seventh grade. And if parents didn't get the permission slip or the child decided not to give it to them, then they're going to get the full meal deal, without parents ever knowing. So it's a real concern.
Which is not also including the abstinence message.
No.
And that's the part I have a hard time with. It's not that you're just giving people contraceptive ideas. Sure, that's fine. But the fact that that's not an implied message that as an institution, we would encourage you not to engage in sexual behavior while you're in school, while you're supposed to be learning and developing your cognitive abilities, that's not the time and the place to be developing your other sides of your sexuality.
Exactly. And I mean, that is the safest, that is, abstinence will forever be the safest mode of any kind of contraception. It's safe for your soul. It's safe for your body. It is the safest mode. And unfortunately, our culture just kind of turned that into an impossibility or something that's shameful instead of celebrating people that have waited and that chosen that it is doable to abstinent is something that is doable, and it's dignifying, and it's showing respect
Mhm.
in yourself and the people around you.
Yeah.
And God made us so that we're more than the animals of the earth. We don't have
Yes.
to every urge
Yeah.
on an animal. We're a precious creation, and
Yeah.
he's designed this beautiful gift of sexuality that's
Mhm.
only designed inside of a covenant marriage. And so that whole message from what sex is really about is missing,
Mhm.
from any of that curriculum. And so that's where parents, need to be so involved in that part. There's so many great resources out for people that are in the church and for believers, and
Mhm.
to your kids about sexuality, and that's such a need for that to come from home, and
Yeah.
in my opinion, not from school but from home.
Yes. And I think there's a great curriculum from Chris Valentin called Moral Revolution, I think it's called.
Exactly. Yes.
So there are resources out there. It's not that we're saying put your head in the sand and you should just pretend like it doesn't exist. I mean, kids are going to be exposed through it through social media and celebrities and all the things anyway. But I don't think that the message of, hey, as an institution, we're the people telling you about history, about facts, about multiplication and social studies and sex. Like that's just too much of a message of implied permission. I don't know how to put my finger on it, so maybe you can help me. But there's just this sense of like, we're the authority figures and we're almost telling you something in a way that validates that you should be engaging in this, just like you should be engaging in your homework or in your swimming or your, debate club or whatever. Like there's just this sense that no, like we really should be reinforcing that kids are engaging in their personhood. I can't tell you how many clients I talk to that say, I don't know who I am. It feels like I'm empty inside. It feels like I've given every piece of myself away and I don't know who I am anymore. Or how many clients are going, I don't know how many sex tapes are out there and I'm 16. I'm 18 years old. And all through middle school and high school, I've now had so many um, things happen that they've maybe sent the nude to the boy and then he sent it to the whole school, or vice versa. I mean, girls can do it as well. Just this behavior that they don't have a prefrontal cortex to make wise executive decisions for long-term consequences. So major life decisions are being made and the school is going, hey, here's your options. Use this contraception, and say, instead of saying, hey, you have more worth and value than just to be an object for somebody to use. Or how sickening it is for me, for a young man in my office to say, oh yeah, me and my guy friends will drive down streets and be like, oh yeah, I hit that one, banged that one, fingered that one, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, could you imagine if the girl actually knew these guys were saying that? You're literally just an object at that point. And so that makes me wonder, where's the feminist movement? Where are the women who are saying like women are worth more than that? Like the moral revolution has not done us any favors. Like this whole sexual revolution of just use your body and you're just as debased as a man. I am not buying it because we're, a good decade, several decades out. And I think women are getting more screwed over than ever by just allowing men to use us. And the guys don't value women when they do that. And so then the women are trying to be just as crass. And then I hear girls say, oh, I just need a dick pics or I just need a dick fix. And I'm like, I can't believe the culture I'm living in where males and females are literally objectifying each other to a member of their body, literally an object of the person, not a whole person that I'm in love with and I'm choosing to commit to and honor them and respect them and find them intelligent and creative and witty. And so there's this breakdown even of the soul that, going now back to therapy, people don't know who they are. They don't know how to attach in adult relationships because we've conditioned as a society, and this is going beyond just the school system, but as a society that it's normal to objectify somebody, that they are just an instant gratification to try to make me feel better. And girls are often looking for sex for the guy to give sex for the guy to say, I love you, or make them feel pretty or smart. But then I'll hear the guy talk about how devalued and disrespecting and everything but her face, like these messages that are just so heartbreaking. And yet she's looking for value and worth. And then he's looking for respect and dignity and she doesn't. And she's talking about what a lousy lay he was. And I'm like, Oh my gosh, no wonder our divorce rate, no wonder we're having a bunch of baby mamas and all this stuff, because people don't know who they are and they don't know how to attach with others when sexuality is introduced in this very compartmentalized, broken way, versus encouraging at an academic level that you abstain from that, save that until you're a whole person who knows how to connect with another whole person.
And I would just add to that, in the safety of God's design. And I know that in the public schools, it's a little bit trickier to communicate it that way, but just as believers, our culture has changed so much that it's not just, where it used to be shameful, it was shameful to have lost your virginity, 50 years ago, and now it's shameful to have kept your virginity. And been such a culture shift, and it's been out of this spirit of perversion. And I won't pretend that it's not also in the church. We've seen pornography statistics in the church, but to combat that, we have to come back to God's original design and the safety and the wisdom and the loving kindness and the value of what that is. And I think if that can be taught from parent to child, and not so much well, if you're going to do this, then this is what you need to do, but the reasoning behind the protection of God's wisdom was such a beautiful gift. I think that's the message that is not being conveyed. And our youth, we're all very curious beings. We will wander and figure it out and find the whatever's on the internet. And I mean, kids are doing that left and right. And so parents having that relationship with their kids, realistically knowing that they're probably looking and experimenting and finding all of those things, but having a safe place for them to come and ask the hard questions and get a real biblical answer. And it just so grieves me. I was sharing with you earlier that I happened to be in a school a year after two sixth graders were found having sexual relationship inside a restroom during a school evening event with phones and photographs involved. And those kids had to not only face the shame of that and being disciplined for that, and the whole school finding out about that, but I just can't even imagine having a sexual experience at that age and knowing that that's happening, multiple times across our culture, where people are having multiple partners by the time they hit their 20s, or actually are in a place where they could become a parent. They are at a place where they're responsible enough to reproduce and have a baby and a child and take care of that child and be parents and understand what it is to be able to provide for a wife and be, somebody that's going to be a contributor to society. And they've had multiple sexual relationships up until that point. And so anyway, it's just creating this culture that kind of eating itself from the inside out, but God, he's doing amazing things. And I'll just probably end with this, but I just recently heard of this organization that moved to Dallas, and they had been out of LA, but they had been going into high school campuses and talking with administrators and teachers, and just very patiently and very graciously and honoring, asking them, is there anything like a Bible study or a prayer group going on your campus? And they've been targeting some of the hardest schools, inner city schools. And, they'll go in every month. Has anything started yet? Has anything started yet? Any student movements happening yet? And nothing had happened. And so finally, the administrators have heard wind of this, and they've invited them into their offices and said, okay, what are you about? What's going on? And they just said, hey, we just want to meet with kids once a week. We want to bring donuts. We want to bring pizza, and we want to teach them about Jesus and the gospel. And administrators are at a place where they're saying, okay, at it. Here's our gym. So they're seeing massive salvations. They're seeing 200 kids come to know the Lord, after.
Mhm.
And I think our schools right now are so ripe for the harvest. We've just
Mhm.
come in like a flood in some ways and just rob so much of their innocence and their purity. And it's such a ripe harvest right now because, sin always has a fruit and it's brokenness. And so we've got a lot of broken kids, but God is still advancing. Yeah. And
Yes.
a lot of
Yes.
salvations happening.
So I
So
want to thank you for your time. Jenny, you are so sweet and you marinate in the presence of God and it's obvious. It comes across in your
oh,
tone and facial expressions and the way that you articulate yourself. You're just so lovely and gracious. So I want to thank you for your time.
thank
We
you.
want to thank everybody who has hung in there with us and honoring those who, whether you're a parent or you are on the school board or you're a teacher or you're a teacher's aide or a principal or a school counselor, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being on assignment and seeing worth and value and dignity in every young person and knowing that this is a mission field. And especially in the public school system, you have the influence really to help positively shape. And you may not always be able to necessarily share the gospel, but you can share the gospel in the way that you love them, in the way that you look at them, and they can see Jesus reflected through the way that you treat them. And so I honor you. I'm so grateful for every person on this mountain. And I'm praying that more godly teachers, principals, administrators, school board, city council, that people are called into those positions and we start really taking these places with light and with love to change districts, to change the educational system so that these kids are raised with true principles that build them up, that when they're raise them in the way they should go, that when they're old, they will not depart from it, that there is
Yes.
such a good inheritance, a good future for these young people. And that's why there's such a war over them, to just over their mind and their hearts and their emotions. And so I just honor again every person who's a part of that fight, who is helping to be the light, the ambassador in your school district, to help make a difference for these young people to see who they are and not just how they're acting. We love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you for the next episode. Bye.